God. It's just, this is stupid. I'm already regretting this.
Do you have anything else to add, Fancy Alice? Oh, get your foot off the power button, please. Thank you.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our role-playing campaign. Today is a very special bonus episode as I am joined by Jacob Vogts. I don't know if there's a job title or a title that we should use for you in general. Maybe
Fancy Alice's caretaker.
Fancy Alice's caretaker, maybe meme connoisseur, or my fiance and partner. How are you doing,
I mean,
babe?
certainly, fiance is secondary to caretaking for Fancy Alice every day.
Yeah, of course. Just for context for the listeners, so Fancy Alice is Jacob's cat, which is a whole story we do not need to go into right now because we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons. First of all, how are you, dear? Everything going well?
Oh, I thought you said you were just going to talk the whole time. I didn't realize it was a conversation. Yeah, everything's going well. Playing a lot more golf because I can't do anything else.
Yeah, so in case people haven't realized, Jacob is American. I don't know if anything gave that away.
I don't know. I think it would be pretty subtle and hard to pick up on.
I think so. So Jacob, before we begin, what is your experience with D&D in general? Have you always sort of played it, or have you sort of come into it recently?
I guess I had played it a little bit in high school, like once or twice. That would have been 3-5, just like a couple little times that I just joined in on some other people that I knew session. And then played 4th edition once or twice when I was on camp staff. We tried to start a game one summer, and then it didn't really pan out. And then didn't play until I was studying in England, and we started that campaign with the Quidditch people. I don't know if that was a success. We took like a month and a half to do what should have taken like a session and a half.
No, babe, that because we played the Lost Mines of Phandelver.
Yeah, I know. It took us like, we started, and when I left, which was like a month and a half, maybe 2 months after.
No, you were
it was
there
probably
longer than
like, but it was, yeah, but we only played for the last, we probably played for the last 3 months, but we were only playing every other week. So like 6 sessions. And I think when I left, we had just finished clearing out the goblins.
Really early on, yeah.
Yeah, like the very first thing that you do. Second, if you end up just ignoring it and going to Phandalin and then being essentially told to go back and find
backtracking itself.
Gundren.
Yeah, that's interesting because that session, the goblin session, was my very first D&D session. That's when I sort of first did it. Yeah.
Sessions plural. We took a long time for those.
Yeah, well, that was. I mean, obviously we'd met through Quidditch and stuff, but D&D is something that we did together. Just sort of before we started going out dating and stuff. So yeah, so D&D is quite important to both of us. And obviously now you are running like 3 campaigns, right?
Yeah, so pretty much immediately after I got back from study abroad, I more or less never played again because I would play at the game store, but I also was like the backup DM for the game store for Adventure League nights. And then that turned into, sort of a 50-50 split there. And then I started up my own group with my own Quidditch friends. And then I had like a summer that I was on an internship. So we played online, and I did get to play for the beginning of that year at a game store around where I was at interning for. And then I ended up running a group because they needed more people to run stuff. And then the next 2 years at school, I had that other group, the Quidditch group, kind of dispersed because people graduated and we just didn't have time. And then I was still playing at the game store, but I was still backup DM. So it was like a 50-50 split most of the time, depending on how many people showed up any given week. And then I started up a new group, and that group's still going online. kind of. It's lost a couple people and gained a couple people, so it's a pretty
Typical
different
D&D.
group now as far as like group dynamic goes. And then when I graduated and moved out, started up a new group, and then started an online group with some other kind of Quidditch friends, but also just people I knew from high school, longtime friends. So yeah, so now I have 3, and if any of my friends ask to join, I have to just tell them no, because all the groups are basically at 6 players, so I don't want to go above that. I don't get to play anymore. I just run.
So what was it like being a Adventurers League DM? Obviously, it's very specialized modules that come out. I don't know the process at all, so if you can.
So I mean, like they're interesting modules. It was chaos a lot because like I wouldn't know sometimes. Like I would get the module. Eventually, I just had the DM. Like after the first couple times, I had the other DM just email me all the modules so I could sort of read through them and kind of know, you know, what was going to be happening in case I was running one. But like we had, like when I first started playing at the game store, you know, maybe we had 8 people, you know, so we only had one group, and once or twice there were like 6 people who just showed up out of nowhere who wanted to try. And so one of the other guys would go and DM for them. And then that next year, we had like 8 to 10 people who were pretty consistent, like probably 10 people, but out of them like 8 would show up every week. But you know, and it was pretty consistent. So we were one group, and then there were maybe 20 other people who would just, sometimes 6 of them would show up, sometimes, you know, 4, sometimes all 20. And so they were another group. But if we had like 16 of those people show up, I mean, you just can't run a 16-person group, right?
Not.
And so
Crazy.
and so then that's when I would have to be the extra DM. Or if we had 8 of them show up and then the other DM just wasn't there, you know, sometimes he would be, sometimes he wouldn't. You know, he was pretty good about communicating beforehand, but not every time. So sometimes I would show up and I would just have to have my backpack with all of my DM stuff. And if I played, I just pulled out the PHB and my character sheet and some dice. I was good. And if I was DMing, then I had all of the other books that I might need, and I had printed off copies of the modules. So I kind of like knew what was going on. Although second semester, the group that I like was a player, and we sort of continued on to older modules that were higher level, that were just kind of more fun. You know, the DM had read through the new release ones, was like, these kind of suck. I don't want to do them. They're not going to be super enjoyable. Let's do something else. And then the other group was continuing on to that one, or they were sort of starting over because there was a big turnover, and so they would start over not at level 1, but like maybe, I don't know what level they were. Maybe they'd go back to like level 3 and sort of start over a little bit because the people wanted to try new classes and stuff. You know, they were new to D&D, whereas the other group of people had been playing a lot longer, and so they kind of wanted to just play characters to a higher level. So it was chaos, both as a player and as a DM, because like as a player, you get to the point that you're like, well, we have 10 of us at this table. So combat's going to take forever. We don't really need much more damage, you know, like we kind of have every role filled. So then I'm just going to mess around. So then you end up playing like a wizard that never deals any damage or something, you know, just for fun. And then as a DM, you know, suddenly, you know, it's like, oh, we have 12 people at this table because we only have one extra DM. So there's, you know, the other guy didn't show up. So I have 12 people to DM for, which is a lot. So it was chaos, but it was fun. I mean, you know, you get a lot of people who are just trying it for the first time.
You've obviously ran a lot of D&D, like you said. Like you've not really had a chance to play. You've only played in one-shots and stuff. But I think you've run a lot of published material.
I have 500 hours on Roll20, and that's really in the last like.
That's more recently, I'd say. Yeah, but I want to know, like, because obviously we've spoken about it briefly, but you have run more published material, so like Wizard of the Coast or actual modules and stuff. Would you ever run your own homebrew stuff, or have you homebrewed anything?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I'm doing for my 2 of my 3 campaigns right now are my own stuff. I mean, sometimes I steal things from other campaigns, but they're all my own design. They're set in the Forgotten Realms because I didn't want to make a whole new world, and it was convenient, and they were so one of the groups was already campaigning in the Forgotten Realms. I just transitioned it. But I don't know, I would, but also a lot of the pre-made modules are fun. They're good. I mean, the one that I'm running that's pre-made right now is Dungeon of the Mad Mage, because I didn't want to go through the process of making one I wanted to just do a dungeon crawl and have one that would go all the way up to like 20th level eventually. And, you know, who knows if we'll actually play it long enough to get there. But in the future, I mean, if like one of my groups, sort of if we reach a conclusion to the campaign, one of the ones that I'm doing from scratch, one of my Ack Inc ones,
Hmm.
I probably would run just a pre-made one again, because if you have three, I certainly wouldn't do three campaigns with all of them being homebrew stuff.
Yeah, that sounds
I
way too
have
much.
a job, I play hockey, I golf, that takes up a lot of my time right there. I spend
You've got
time with Fancy Alice. Yeah, that's a lot of time. Um, you know, and somehow I got to try and squeeze a couple minutes a day in there to spend, talking to you.
Oh, well, thanks for
So
scheduling this in. I appreciate
yeah,
it.
so so it takes time.
Yeah.
I find myself stealing maps from other places a lot and repurposing them
Hmm.
because it's super quick. It can be also because I'm bad at making maps, designing maps. But the other part is it's just easy. You find find an image of it online. And then I have so many of the books where I've ran so many, I sort of know the map where I could think, oh, what would be a great cult hideout is this cult hideout from Princes of the Apocalypse. Boom, done. And it gets you a feel for in this area of this adventure, it's a party designed for 4 players of 7th level, and you go, well, I have 5 players of 7th level, so I need it to be, or 6 players for me. It's really always 6 players of 7th level, so it's going to need to be harder, but you can sort of reference some of the enemies there and see what's like, I don't want to go below this, and get a feel for, is this challenging, like what would be a sort of considered a fair, or maybe you don't want it to be super hard, so you kind of just say, I'm going to leave it as is, or I need, so this is what I've got, but I'm going to change it. I don't want a bunch of orcs, but I can find something that's equivalent, or whatever. So it can be nice to steal maps, but ultimately it's easy to run a pre-made campaign. You have to still read ahead and do this stuff, but it's nice if you're busy.
Just to have it all there, yeah.
Yeah, it can be nice to just have it. And certainly with the online stuff, if you're playing online and you spend the money to buy it, like on Roll20, for instance, boom, then all the lighting stuff is in there already, and all the monster tokens are in there, and it's all set up. If you make it yourself and you're playing online, you have to make a map regardless, but it takes more time inputting the map. And then if you want to have the dynamic lighting style stuff in Roll20 or whatever you're using, if it has lighting stuff, potentially, I know in Roll20 you have to have you have to put all those lines in sort of to denote the walls separately. So then that becomes more work.
Which makes sense.
Pre-made modules, especially if you're playing online and you can buy it in a package that's it's pre-packaged and ready to go, it makes it really nice.
Before we sort of move on to the main thing, you mentioned a few modules there, and currently you're obviously playing through Dungeons of the Mad Mage, which I have played in as well, and I've really enjoyed the briefest of glimpses I've seen of it. But I kind of wanted to know, is there a particular favorite module that you refer to? Is there a particular one that you like looking at, or you like reincorporating into your campaigns, or just like reading about?
Well, I find myself incorporating right now a lot of Princes of the Apocalypse, which is a pretty good module. I tried running it with one group before, and they didn't have a lot of buy-in. They were like, well, we don't really care about this cult stuff. So then we transitioned to Tomb of Annihilation. So I tried, I incorporate a lot of that right now just because it's all with cult stuff. And one of my groups is currently, at the beginning of it, they were doing a lot more cult elimination kind of things, but they've sort of moved away from that. But I don't know. So mostly I've used that a lot recently. Yeah. But I find myself a lot actually looking up old modules like 3.5 or even before that. I have the one group that's doing some cool stuff now. They're sort of trying to take on the Zentarum and sort of destabilize them, and so they're over by Darkhold, which is the Zentarum keep after Zentil Keep was destroyed. And they wanted at first to try and like attack it, which I knew wasn't going to be a good idea because it was going to inherently be, they were way too low level. But you could find old modules or old, in that case, I don't think it was a module, it was some other book. They used to have really a lot more books about just the lore in the world. I bought the 3.5 Forgotten Realms campaign setting book, which is, a huge resource that I use for the world. Because it doesn't just focus on the Sword Coast, it has the entire world, Thay and Schultz and everywhere else. But then you want to know specifically, you want to know more about Thay, cool, and like it lands over there. They have a whole book just for that, the unapproachable East. You want to know more about the Anarok Desert and the people who used to live there. They don't have a book specifically for that, but it's included in Lost Empires of the Forgotten Realms or something like that. It's like they had a lot more books to do the lore. and to do stuff. So I find myself like looking up a lot of old, and then some of their modules, covered things like that, or even some of these other books had like example encounters. That one with the Lost Empires has like an example encounter with Netherese people from the City of Shade. And so, okay, cool. I'm going to use that in one of mine. They're heading to the Anarok Desert. So, it gives you something there. So like, I really find myself looking at a lot of older books because, they have a lot of extra stuff. They have a lot of lore that's useful in designing the stuff. And it's trying to sort of keep it within the realm of the Forgotten Realms and what it's supposed to be like.
I think that's one thing I've discovered through playing RPGs in general, is that once you've got a system down, regardless of how complicated it is or how easy it is to remember, more and more people, I think, do want settings that inspire them for the stories. So, like you said, all these different, forgotten places in Forgotten Realms. For me, it's like I enjoyed reading up about sci-fi stuff, and more recently looking at like Call of Cthulhu stuff, which again I know doesn't seem very like original or anything like that for most people who play RPGs, but actually I find it really new because I've never grew up reading these things. We're going to talk today about something that you and I have in common, which is watching D&D streams, or at least listening to them on and off. I will say we're definitely not up to date on any of the ones we've been listening to, but we're going to talk about Acquisitions Incorporated, and specifically their sort of chapter on company positions in franchise. So I wonder if you can just sort of summarize what Acquisitions Incorporated, can't even say it, what Acquisitions Incorporated, oh my God, I just restart the podcast.
What about, can you say literary?
No, I'm not saying, you can't do that. Not on my podcast, you can't just.
I'm gonna do it on your podcast. Fiona always, Fiona and I like to do online pub quizzes as well. And she always has to read off the questions. And it turns out, for being a native English speaker, she knows very little about pronunciations in the English language. One such word that she struggles with is literary or literacy, but especially literary. She just always says like,
look, I can't do it under pressure.
It's not. Yeah, the pressure of just reading off a question to me.
We are going to talk about Acquisitions Incorporated. There you go. And basically sort of discuss one of the main sort of features of it. If you've watched any of the streams or heard about it, they have these things called company positions. So Jay, I was wondering if you could just sort of briefly summarize what AC Inc. was, a brief sort of history of it, and what you sort of know about this.
So it started off, I don't remember what year, with Chris Perkins as the DM, and it was Penny Arcade people as the players. So it was Jerry Holkins and Mike Kerhowick, and then Scott something played Binwell. I don't remember his last name now.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
And so he actually wasn't a Penny Arcade employee. He just like shared an office space with them, and they had known him for forever and stuff. And so they were playing. It was when 4th edition was coming out, and Wizards wanted to sort of have a way to introduce it and have something to sort of hype it up, right? And maybe, get it out there and sort of as an advertising thing, but also, something to engage the 3-5 players, because if you know anything about the history, you need to know that a lot of 3-5 players did not like 4th edition. They just kept on playing 3-5, and then, maybe now some of them play 5th edition, but for the most part, they've continued to play 3-5 or potentially moved to Pathfinder, which is essentially just 3-5 under a different name with a few changes. Open. But so they started up this podcast, and they would play at, in-person sessions at PAX, and that's really just what it was. It started off as a podcast, and then it transitioned to, just those first few episodes to sort of get it going, and then it really just became more or less just at PAX and things like that. And so they played 4th edition. I don't know if Scott had ever played D&D. I know Mike had never. He plays Jim Darkmagic. So Scott played Binwin Bronzebottom, who has since left the show. Mike played Jim Darkmagic. He had never played D&D before, I believe. And Jerry plays Omendron, who's like the main. Essentially, they're all sort of equal, but really he's like sort of the main guy, which makes sense. Penny Arcade is his, company, him and Mike. But he's like the main guy, and he has been playing, I think, for a long time. I mean, I know for a long time. I know he played at 3-5 at least. I know he's references. I think he's referenced back to like 2nd edition before and stuff. He's been playing for a long time. And then of course Chris Perkins is the DM, and Chris Perkins was, and still is working at Wizards and does stuff with the, game design and such.
One of the lead writers.
So they played, and they would get they would have guests every so often. Will Wheaton was a long-running guest. He was sort of a semi-permanent one for a while. And so essentially the whole joke, the whole shtick behind it was that they were like an adventuring company. So they're an incorporated company. So they're so they always make jokes about like business things, right? And they're making jokes potentially somewhat about the fact that they all work in business things and they're all pretty high up in a business structure. And so they are making jokes about that kind of stuff. And they're always making like contracts. So they're doing different things like that. So then like Will comes on as an intern. I don't remember his character's name because I
AFL.
don't really care.
That's cruel.
And then after, maybe even while he was still there, but for sure after he left, Patrick Rothfuss came on as a guest. It really was just a full-time kind of thing. And they've had some other regular guests. They'll bring on Morgan Webb from Attack. Did she host Attack of the Show? Yeah, Attack of the Show, and on G4, just something else, different things on G4. So she's a regular guest. And recently they've had, I just forgot that pro wrestler's name guy.
Xavier Woods.
Yeah, they've had him on recently, pretty frequently, the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 maybe.
Yeah.
But they bring on guests. They'll bring on sometimes different like celebrity style guests just for one-time things. They'll bring on, if they don't really have maybe a guest who can make it, they'll bring in members of the C Team, which is their sort of a stream that Penny Arcade did, which is like essentially one of the franchises of ACK Inc. And so Jerry's the DM, and then it's for Penny Arcade employees, and now some of them are. I think they were always Penny Arcade employees, and now some of them work for Wizards as well.
Yeah.
And so, so they'll do live shows as well, and they do a weekly stream. And I mean, that's pretty much it. So they all do different things, and then they just, I don't know what year, last year, 2 years ago, 2019. So last year, they released a like campaign setting book. It was the first Wizards official official D&D book, and a thing like that wasn't solely by Wizards. That was done as a collaboration, like with, and really primarily by, for the most part, I think, another entity, in this case Penny Arcade. So it was the first time that like somebody else's thing like that has been incorporated, but of course they've had a working relationship with them for years now.
Over 10 years.
So they've got that. So it's the first, it'd be like if Wizards made Matt Mercer's stuff into, put his stuff in another, like in the next Xanathar's Guide to Everything, put his classes, or something like that, right?
Well, they have done with the Explorer's Guide to Wildround in the latest one in it. But you're right, like ACK Inc. was the thing that paved the way. And I think it's interesting because I think certainly for you and me, I didn't get into ACK Inc. until I was watching Critical Role and High Rollers I got from Ryan. And then I started listening to ACK Inc. and it'd been out for a couple of years by that point. And then, like you said, the thing that catches me about ACK Inc. is the silliness of the sort of the business model. Like, it makes sense, and I've said this before, that it makes sense. And in the Forgotten Realms, adventuring is a business. You are going to be hired, there's going to be all these protocols for it. And it actually makes a lot of sense. And also, it makes a lot of sense that this sort of middle management style, like when you watch the shows or when you listen to the podcast and you listen to all sort of how they are playing it, you realize that these people are inept at leadership as much as they are inept at their stuff as well. And it plays through, and it is so fun to watch. And it has obviously grown this sort of big audience, there's catchphrases, and now they're using ACK Inc. as a way to showcase material. So the launch of Eberron and Ravnica, I mean, obviously remaking and revamping those settings.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. I mean, from the beginning, after the fourth head. So the fourth head is really like sort of the podcast, because they wanted to show people how to play it, which was great because, you had somebody who hadn't played it before. You had people who hadn't played it before, right? And then you had even 1 or 2 people who had never played D&D. So you had, it essentially was just hey, here's 4th edition, get a feel for it, see what it's like. And then once they sort of transition, especially once they stopped having 4th edition, but then after that, once they had sort of done the task of, introducing 4th edition, then it transitioned to, hey, we've got an upcoming module where they do this, and here's a little just couple hour thing in which it's not really, doesn't have anything to do with that story at all, so much as it's just set in the same place and has maybe one of the same people or something like that, and there you go. this is what you can look forward to.
Yeah, exactly like that. And as a result, I think again, Penny Arcade, this was obviously way before Twitch and YouTube, like being big on like showing stuff like this and then realizing they could take advantage on like weekly Twitch streams and stuff if you didn't already have like an original storyline. So obviously like Critical Role does. But yeah, so that was really interesting to see. And obviously Wizards have their own streams and stuff, but actually people who were quite big in sort of the con industry, like, I mean, that's the thing. I don't know how much it is now, but like weekly comic strips and stuff were quite big.
I thought you were going to talk about the con industry, and I was going to say, well, it's not because of COVID. So
no, that was obvious. But I'm thinking like comic, so like websites specifically for like daily comics and stuff. I don't know if that's as big anymore as it used to be. But obviously at the time, Penny Arcade was like, and is to an extent still one of the most popular sites.
Yeah, I think they're still going strong with comic stuff. I don't. Maybe it's not. I know they still got some comics. I've seen some every so often. I know. Mike, I think, still has one that he's at least one.
Yeah.
That is kind of still almost like the Ack Inks, or every so often he makes at least comics about the Ack Ink people.
Yeah.
Doing stuff.
So just sort of moving on a little bit now. So obviously, again, talked a lot about the sort of background to it, but again, I find it quite interesting to have this sort of idea which can be implemented in any campaign system. It doesn't have to necessarily be with the Ack Ink stuff, but going into the company position. So as we sort of alluded to, a franchise essentially is a party, and they're given contracts from Ack Ink head office to go out and do missions. And these can range from anything between sort of going to hunt monsters or to investigate something and then report back to head office with treasure or with the contract in hand, etc.
Right. Well, they can also go. They could be hired. They'll be hired by like local people and stuff.
Yeah.
As well. It's not all just head office says go do this. Head office says go do this. It's so every so often maybe head office says go do this. Otherwise, it's go find your own adventures. Pay us your monthly fee.
Yeah, exactly. Which again is so corporate. I love it. And it was, again, this sort of thing came out more so in the C team streams, which again, and I'm sure we'll both talk about this, but like, I highly recommend watching them because again, it's a very unique style of playing and all the players on it are actually really entertaining to watch it. So let's talk about these sort of company positions. So when you become a member of an Ack Ink franchise, there's sort of 8 different positions you can take. And what's interesting about these positions is that you can only ever take one in a franchise. If you transfer to another one, you lose the first one you had. You gain it in addition, independent of your background, your classes, etc. So it's like another thing to add on, which I thought was quite interesting. It doesn't replace something. But also, again, another very corporate thing about it is that each individual option, each individual position, you get obviously certain benefits with each one, but also pre-approved tools which are given to you from head office, which are attuned to you and only you, and no one else in your franchise or anyone else in a different franchise but in the same position can use it. But as soon as you leave that franchise, you have to give it back to head office, which again is like, another thing. You hand in your stationery, you hand in your business cards, etc. But yeah, so I'll just quickly run through the 8 different ones we have. So we've got Cartographer, which is the sort of person that sort of navigates when your franchise is off on a mission. They sort of look at the terrain and stuff, so a bit of a navigator. You've got the Decisionist, who is essentially the leader in quotation marks. If there is ever a vote in your franchise, they get the deciding vote, and then as you level up, you get more vote, which I thought was great.
They get the deciding vote in the case of a tie.
In a tie, but then you've also got like they have a coin of decisionary, which I thought was great, and also absence votee. So if you have a vote in the Decisionist absence, they can come back and redo the vote, which I thought was good. You've got the Documancer, who is the person in charge of recording, getting the contracts, keeping them safe, making sure they are checked off with a letter, and then reporting back to head office. You then have the Hoardsperson, which, again, I quite like this position because there's always one person in a party that has to have all the loot because they have the bag of holding or they have the haversack with the extra dimensional space. So that's the person who looks after all the equipment, all the treasure and stuff, and keeps an inventory of that. And then you've got 4 slightly, I don't know if they're more advanced per se, but they're more interesting ones which you probably could have. I'd say those first 4 are like the main ones, certainly that you see in the C team, but also these other ones are sort of like in addition to. So if you have a party of 8, then each person could have a role. So the other 4 are Loremonger, who is someone that records all sort of folklore or all sort of information, and you can repeat it back or get that information, sort of recorded history. Now, I can't pronounce this one. I've been trying, but is it Obviator?
Obviator.
Obviator, who is more of a tactician. They're sort of working out what, trying to read the enemies and try and sort of work it out. They deal with sort of alchemical stuff. Again, quite interesting. The Occultant.
It's Occultant.
Occultant.
So it's occult and then ANT.
Okay, occult.
You just gotta sound it out. Occultant.
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 Thank you. You're so supportive.
I know, it's why I'm such a great fiance.
Occultant, who is someone that works out the karma of the individual deaths of the things you killed, whether that will impact on either themselves or the franchise or even headquarters, which I thought was quite good. And then the Secretarian, who is
Secretarian. No T at the end. You're thinking of Secretariat, the horse, winner of the Triple Crown.
And they are responsible for sort of the PR, sort of the marketing, doing all the jingles and all the sort of things that are very, again, corporate branding, which I absolutely love as well. You sort of briefly mentioned it earlier. In your campaign, which is Ack Inc. inspired or using the mission and stuff like that, what are your players playing? What sort of the company positions are they using?
So out of my 10 players between the two campaigns that are Ack Inc., I don't even know. I don't think I have any Decisionists.
Oh, really?
I have no Cartographers. I did have a Cartographer, but then he had to quit, but we gained another. Each one of them has a Documancer. Yes.
But that makes sense.
Each one of them has a Hoardsperson. One at least has a Secretarian. I might even have a Cartographer. I don't remember with the one. So the biggest problem is that some of them are really similar.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't always use their stuff, so I don't always remember who's who. But out of the 8, I think I have 5 of them at least. Well, I must have 6 because I have one campaign with 6 people. So I have 6. I don't have any Decisionist. If I do have a Decisionist, then they don't ever. The group never takes votes, or the vote never comes down to it.
So for me, when I was looking through this list, I was like, the most obvious one you would have is obviously a Documancer, because you'd need to have that connection with HQ. But then I thought, second of all, you would definitely need a Decisionist, not necessarily because of the voting power or the symbol, but like it's the face of the group, right? I would assume that they, as the leader, would be the ones doing stuff.
So one of my groups, the Bard, is sort of the face of the group, and sometimes the Paladin, because they have good charisma. Oh, and you know what? The Bard is a Secretarian. So which could do it as well. And then in the other one, in my bigger group, was 6 people. The Rogue is like the face of the group, and he's the Secretarian. That group originally had only 5 players. It had an odd number.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have an odd number, then you never have ties. And so the tiebreaker stuff isn't as important.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially you get the whole purpose behind the tiebreaker is your vote counts for 2. So if there is a tie, your second vote is breaking it. Well, if you have an odd number of people, then if the vote is 3-2 and you're on the side of 2, your second vote brings it to 3-3. And so now you have a tie. You have a legitimate tie, and your ability to get your second vote doesn't matter, right? So you'll never get a tie. So you'll never be breaking ties. The best case scenario is you'll be creating ties. So, so like that's a huge part of it. I mean, it's only the one part, but that is a pretty substantial part.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of just go, yeah. But I think the Secretarian is the one that gets the most sort of traction in my groups. They do end up doing the most Secretarian-based stuff. And then the Hoardsperson does a lot with the Hoardsperson. Ultimately, the first 4 especially are just like making a position out of an unofficial sort of role that you would normally have in your traditional 4-person party, especially back, when Jerry would have started playing, and right now in Jerry's online, in the C team, they don't really have like a map. He describes it. It's all theater of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to do stuff, and for them, it doesn't really matter, but if it was more old school, but it was a pretty like a sort of hardcore campaign, somebody's job would be to draw the map of the dungeon that you're in, because you need to know where stuff is. And now with like, either using online tools or people having all these mats that they draw it out, now that we really use a grid and stuff and use the minis and stuff, and it's not as much theater of the mind, you don't need to worry about it as much. Decisionist, somebody was always sort of the leader or sort of just said, oh, we have a tie. Well, I'm just going to start doing this. Documancer, same thing. Somebody's always keeping notes. Hoardsperson, somebody's always keeping track of the loot and what do we
Yeah.
have as a party or how we're doing stuff. And then like the other ones are almost sort of variants on those. Like the Loremonger is still really similar to the Documancer in as so much as you are gathering information, right? It's just more. It's more about gathering information, but it's still similar as far as what like the sort of unofficial role would be. Obviator similar to Decisionist, but it's more like combat oriented. Occultant's kind of out there. It's a little different. Secretarian's kind of like Decisionist, or kind of like Documancer, I guess, more so.
Yeah.
But it's sort of a combination between that and Decisionist, where you might be like more the face of the party as well. But there's just sort of adding stuff and adding things to these unofficial roles that you would have in parties,
I agree with you completely. I think, the first 4 seem very standard, like we've all played that role at some point in the campaign, and the other ones can be in place of, except the Occultant. The Occultant, to me, it sounds like a great role. There's always someone that plays that and going, oh, but this is going to look really bad on us. We shouldn't kill them. It's going to look really bad, etc. And I quite like that as a sort of, again, when I sort of imagine it as a sort of a corporate setting, it's a person who is the health and safety risk management type person who's like worrying about like how be perceived and stuff. So I do quite like that one, but I agree it feels maybe the less useful in terms of gameplay, but good in terms of roleplay. But I say this, like all these positions, all of their abilities and the items they get, they are mostly for flavor. And so just going back to what you said about the cartographer, the cartographer has the tale of safe travel, which is an ability to perform a 45-minute ritual using certain tools, blah, 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 blah. It ensures safe travel for you and your team from one location to another within a day's journey. And it has to be a location you have been to or have an accurate route of. And what was cool about that one is that, and with all of these roles, it kind of does say it a little bit at the beginning, but for this one specifically, it encourages the player to talk about what they did on their journey, what they faced and how they overcame it and stuff. And the DM can collaborate with it. And I quite like that. With all these positions, it opens that opportunity to have that collaboration. So that's the thing with all DMs when they create their own world or running their own world. The players are in it and they'll have an impact and there'll be consequences. But if the players can actually add to that world, almost like on a meta sort of Minecraft level, I like to think, like sort of you get more engaged. And I quite like that as a sort of a nice theatre of the mind technique. And obviously it is limited because obviously it's within one day's travel. And you have to have been to that location before, or you have to have an accurate route, etc. You can't just be like, I'm just going to go to all these towns. But then later on, it expands to
3 days.
3 days, the greater tale of safe travel, which I quite liked as well. And so I quite like that as a role because like you said, at least there's one person in the party who goes, I will do survivals checks to make sure we can get past this difficult terrain and stuff. Is there one like position that if you were in a campaign as a player, which I appreciate, as you said, you've not done for many, many years, is there one position where you'd be like, I'd like to play that?
I don't know. I'd probably end up with Secretarian. They seem fun.
What is it about Secretarians that you like?
Oh, just hail corporate, baby.
Hail corporate.
Hail corporate.
The Secretarian is the focus on the people and the potential values and stuff. Oh yeah, that's right. You've got the business cards. I quite like this, where you essentially you give out business cards, and they are like cards of sending. People can contact you through them, like sending stones. They can contact you to ask for missions and stuff, but it only lasts for 7 days before it gives out, which I thought that, again, quite cool. And you can only do it 5 times. That's really cool, because again, you could just be talking to an NPC, and then as you go on, a new mission comes up. So that was pretty cool. The rumor mill is another good one, I think. Learn 3 rumors related to creatures or organizations involved in the mission you're currently on that reflect the current or historical knowledge posed by Acquisitions Incorporated. But you don't know how true they are. That comes a little bit later, where you can sort of work out which ones are false. Yeah, I think Secretariat's quite good. I think for me, I quite like Hoardsperson. I feel like any of the current characters I play would be a Decisionist, or would try and go for Decisionist, but I don't think it would work. But if it was me playing in a new campaign that was specifically themed, I think Hoardsperson would be quite good. Mostly because I quite like how the flavour of the sort of the living loot bag, the living loot satchel is. It's got really nice descriptions about how it's different for each class. Like the barbarian has like lots of little bags coming off a big belt, which I thought was quite cool. There's a little bit one later on where you have living the good life, so you can maintain a wealthy lifestyle at no cost because I think, trust you because you're putting all the treasure and it's going to a secret vault somewhere. A little bit later on, you get Leomund's secret chest, so you can actually put stuff in that can fit into a chest-sized thing rather than a small bag. I quite like the feature, that thing you need, where you have to do a DC 15 sleight of hand check to fish out an item of your choice that's somewhere on the adventuring gear table. So again, it's one of those sort of almost like MacGyver type things. You're like, I know exactly what I need to fix this problem or to get out of this situation. Yeah, I think Hoardsperson would be my go-to. Is there anything that you're not particularly keen on, or anything you would change, or you have changed?
I don't know. So, I mean, one of the big things, one, I learned really early on for if they do like the Explorer territory or really any of the franchise tasks. So beyond the company positions, the Hacking book has like a whole franchise task thing. So you can have your hirelings do stuff for you, or you can do it. And one of the big things I learned really early on is anything that involves something that would like present anything that's like, oh, this presents potentially a new, like Explorer territory can give you a new adventuring opportunity, some sort of benefit, some discovery. Sometimes there are threats and that can like hurt your business, and then you have to deal with them. You get ones like what marketeering gets you. Oh no, not marketeering. Marketeering just lowers your monthly costs. I think it's schmoozing is the one I'm thinking of that gives you, like you get more contacts, you get different things. But basically anything that require you to like, oh, they're going to do this and then they're going to learn something to go on an adventure with.
Right.
What I learned really early on is what's going to inevitably happen is they're going to do it. And then as soon as they make the roll, like you're going to say, okay, it takes 1 week, which is 10 days in D&D. And then you go, okay, they do this. And then you go, okay, cool. And then 10 in-game days later, you go, okay, this is done. Let's roll. Let's find the result. And then you go, okay, cool. And then the first thing they're going to say is, well, I want to go on that adventure. And you're like, well, I don't have it prepared yet. Like, I don't know. So what I learned pretty quickly is, anytime they do stuff like that is roll the result straight away. So then you have like one session to prepare.
Yeah. Sure.
But they might just do, well, we just wait 10 days for this to get done because we have nothing else to do. You never know.
Yeah.
But like one of the big things that can get, I don't want to say tedious, but it can get interesting is running the franchise. So because especially at like early on, it depends on what their headquarters is. So like one of my groups had a tower headquarters, but now they have an airship because the tower got destroyed, so they acquired an airship. They had a tower, but like each of the franchise headquarters has a different monthly upkeep cost. Essentially, how much that determines how much you owe to head office as your licensing fee. And then as you gain higher levels, you get new ranks that gets multiplied by other values and goes up. But for instance, if you have the one that I had, which was I called it a fortified tower. No, that's not true. It was an old lighthouse. So it was an old lighthouse. So it was 250 monthly gold cost, which means that they have to earn 250 gold a month minimum to pay Acking. But if the roll goes poorly, they can owe more than that, potentially like double. And if they do like marketeering or explore territory, they discover these threats and that increases their costs more. All of a sudden they could owe, like 750 gold for that month. But it didn't take them long because if you roll really well, you reduce your costs so much that you generate profit without having done anything. And so the roll is just a 1d100 plus all of the days that any character and any employee, any staff member who can do the franchise tasks spent running it. So you get your major domo, and then you get at the very beginning one skilled hireling that you can hire as part of your monthly cost. So that's just like free. So you're already paying that regardless. So they figured out pretty quickly that they could get their major domo and hire a skilled hireling because they're allowed one, and just tell them you guys are running the franchise, which out of the 30-day month means they're going to get a plus 60 to the roll, which means there's a really good chance they have a over 50% chance to max out the roll at the 91 plus scale, which means they're going to make a bunch of money. And so they said, well, we don't need to worry about. At the beginning, they said, we don't care about explore territory. We're doing this other stuff. We're kind of just doing our own area. We don't care about running these other franchise tasks. We can make bank. We have guaranteed. I mean, like, a 60, the lowest they could get is a 61. And that gives you, your costs decrease by 100%. So essentially you break even. So you don't owe any money. So the worst they can do is just not make any money. All they have to do is get an 11 or higher to then be making money. Right. So now they could only make like 125 gold a month off that. They stopped it pretty early on. But like, depending on what you give them, if you're going to do a kind of adventure where you're going to give them a bunch of gold, where it's like they have to adventure a bunch to find a bunch of gold, but also because they have this huge upkeep. So you're going to basically have this massive sums. Or, so let's say they had something. Let's say they had a small castle, which is 3,000 gold a month. Well, by the time you probably afford that, even once you become rank 2, now you can get, which is just level 5, you can get 2 skilled hirelings who can do franchise tasks. So that's your 2 skilled hirelings plus your major domo, all 3 of them running the franchise task for the whole month is 90, which means even if you roll a 1, you're decreasing your monthly cost by 150%, which means you're making a 1,500 gold profit every month, guaranteed. Right. So like that's the one thing is it didn't take my group long to figure out. They were like, oh, so if we just don't care right now until we get level 5, because once you get level 5, then you can do 2 tasks at once. So then they were like, well, if we don't care until we get level 5 about doing these other tasks, we can just guarantee that we don't lose money. And so then you're like, well, yeah, I guess. And there's nothing you could do about it because, I mean, it's just sort of the way it is.
Yeah.
They're just like, yeah, we don't care. Like, we've got this other stuff, and then you're just like, well, like you could just say, well, you don't find any adventuring to do because nobody wants to hire you. But like, then you're kind of just forcing, you're kind of just being a dick about it.
Railroading them into doing it.
Right.
Doing it for the joy of like,
so yeah, so it's like, so it's like if you just go, well, but then they don't, you don't even have to have a job. They can just go, well, we just want to start wandering around, like, are there goblins in the area? Yeah, probably. Cool. We're just going to go hunt goblins, I guess. Right. Like, cool. All right, let's go do it. Or, oh, there's some ruins over there. Like, let's just go explore. And then you don't want to be like, there's nothing there. Like, maybe if you do something else, you could, like explore a territory, you'll find information on stuff. But it's like that's the one thing that can get abused a little bit. And if you give them a palace or a large castle, which you probably would not give that to them, they would have to like buy it.
Yeah, they have to earn that.
Or it'd be way high up. Well, you could as like just a fun, like, essentially have them have like a money sink almost. But then you get the same thing. That's like a 12,000 gold a month thing. So if they can guarantee a 50%, they can guarantee 6,000 gold, a month. And that's the other thing is in theory you do that and you think about it. And you think about like the economy of D&D and you go, well, if they had a way to guarantee that they could make 6,000 gold a month, or even just 125, like 125 gold profit, they're covering all their cost of living and everything. You go, well, yeah, I mean, anybody would do that. Like, why would you ever adventure at that point? You're already making so much more money compared to like the average person in D&D, the average just commoner villager that like, why would you care?
For me, I mean, obviously I'm saying this as someone who hasn't played in a game with this. I enjoyed all of them. Obviously, I see them as jumping off points that you can tweak them to your own things. And I feel this is just me because I'm not used to these sort of things. I feel like it'd be nice to have another level because it just feels like you get up to level 4. For me, I've always been that sort of person, but it's odd numbers are better. So you either get to level 3, 5, or 7.
Okay, well, we're going to have to talk about that. I think we're going to have to call it the engagement. Everybody knows that even numbers are better.
All right, well, that's not true. It's
absolutely true.
Of having odd numbers
absolutely
are
true.
better.
Best basketball player in the NBA, Giannis Antetokounmpo.
We're not having
number
this.
34,
no,
even number.
This is my podcast. You're not allowed to talk about basketball. Add another level in somewhere. I feel like obviously some of the benefits are either get abused or don't get used at all, and that I think it is up to the players, right? So it's like the Decisionist thing.
It's really just my Secretarians that use their stuff a lot. nobody else really. None of my other players really use their stuff. When I tried to give them opportunities to do it, but it's kind of just like they either forget about it or the Hoardsperson does a little bit in one of them. The Documancer does a little bit. One of the Documancers, I guess, does a decent amount.
Yeah.
If they're just like, I don't need it, whatever, I'm one of the, it's like, oh, I'm an Occultant. No, I'm just kidding. The one guy I was thinking of is an Occultant, not a Secretarian. I don't think that group has a Secretarian, and he finally used like the read to kill thing, which is interesting and useful. But like, you get some that like this, the one Secretarian uses his stuff all the time, and then everyone else kind of sometimes uses it, sometimes doesn't. They don't use it a lot because there'd be like just one guy who's a Hoardsperson, just sort of used like really the only one that he really uses. I mean, the living loot satchel, he has it, like, whether he uses it or not, they have it, but he uses it. But then, like, he uses the living the good life, but just sort of every time they do the buying a magic item downtime activity from Xanathar's guide, he uses that to try and explain why he doesn't have to pay to do the task, because part of that is basically you're doing it, you're paying money to live a wealthy lifestyle or whatever. It's stuff, and he's like, well, I already have this, so I shouldn't have to pay at all for this. And I'm like, no, you still have to. You're still like bribing people and stuff. This is more than just a wealthy lifestyle. That's just all part of it. But
I think then for this, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, I think because you have already got the character, you got your race and class, and then you got your background and then other options and stuff. I wonder if you just remove the background completely, which, looking at it right now, looking at the options and stuff, it really weakens your character, right? Because obviously your background, you get some proficiencies, you get some extra tools and stuff, whereas if you replace it with these ones, you don't necessarily get
you get proficiencies. You'll just get different ones.
You get different ones, but I feel like compared to like an actual background, these ones are flavorful. Like, you use them for certain things. So like, it's just one of those things where I think like you either have one or the other. And I think if you're playing an Act Inc. game, you should just use a company position over your back. And then I would say on top of that, I think then you'd have an extra level.
Yeah, so all the proficiencies here from the Act Inc. one are basically just like additional tools.
Tools, you don't get skills.
But you don't get any skills. That's the big thing, is like, but and tools, they can be useful, but and it just depends on what the character's trying to do, but like, it's really gonna vary, because like, if they go, hey, I'm just, like, I don't know, it's like the Documancer, I think, can basically gain stuff with proficiency with tools, like make forgeries and stuff.
Right.
But then if the group never tries to do that to solve a problem, then it's whatever. I don't think that my campaigns are necessarily worse off for the people not really using them as much. No. They sort of take it up, and it talks about it in the book, that it takes it kind of from being like a normal magic level campaign to like a sort of more higher magic level campaign. So if you want that sort of more high magic level thing, or some of these extra abilities can make some things easier, some social interactions, or like the read to kill is essentially just like a little bardic inspiration style thing.
It's supposed to provide more sort of collaborative, like creative moments with this sort of like presenting. But I think what maybe I would do then as well to sort of improve on it, if I got rid of the backgrounds and used company positions, I would say, okay, take Cartographer, for example. They'll have proficiency in survival for tracking stuff, and then perception. Basically take like, I don't know, some ranger stuff, or get them double proficiency in that. Like, actually, I just feel like you said, absolutely. Like, I think having proficiency in skills from backgrounds is very helpful, because obviously that adds to your race and your class and stuff. But I think if I really wanted them to like use these tools, because I've been in sessions, and I'm sure you have been too, Joe, when something's happened, there's a combat, and you're just looking at your sheet for inspiration to help. And like you said, if certainly in combat, you're mostly like, oh, I could do great weapon master, I can rage, I can use cutting words, etc., right? But whereas these sort of things, they feel obviously more social and more sort of like story aspect, which I will say that obviously that is what Act Inc. is. It is most definitely story based over combat heavy video game based, absolutely. Yeah, I guess it's encouraging people more to think that it's a way to play any RPG. So, I mean, I quite like it, but I agree. Some of these ones, I was like, it has to be very specific to use these things. They're fun. You've got to buy into your head. You're like, okay, this is a game where we are part of a franchise. The franchise is integral to our characters, and not just so happens, oh, we're part of the franchise, if you see what I mean. So we've almost sort of come to the end. Do you have any sort of recommendations of similar things that have either sort of like company positions or sort of inspiring things that you think would work well for these sort of settings, other than the obvious of C-Team?
I mean, probably not. It's pretty unique where it's like this whole thing about the business is like, it's like sort of the whole joke stuff behind it. You don't really get that. I can't think of any books. I'm sure there's like some TV shows or something that would be similar that I just don't watch, but
Literally, the only thing I could think of when looking at this is like you're looking for sort of like inspiration for how company office politics works would be just watching the US Office, which I appreciate. It's not very original, but thinking about like you wanted to have a decisionist who is a bit, how can I put this? Maybe not all there, but it's like is a nice, positive person who's like trying to make things happen and like loves their work. You think of Michael, the leader of the office there. You've got Dwight, Jim, all these other sort of characters that you could base off certain positions, which I thought that'd be quite good to do as sort of inspiration for that. That's the only other thing I could come up with. Well, great. Thanks, Jay, for spending some time with me. I know you've got a very busy life with Fancy Alice. I like watching Acquisitions Incorporated, and I really like this idea and implementing it into campaigns. So thank you for that. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Any sort of things that you're doing, or anything you think actually you should check this out?
You should all follow Fiona's Instagram and pester her to post more pictures of Fancy Alice that I sent to her.
Right.
She does. I sent her quite a lot of them, and she doesn't post nearly enough of them. So you should all follow her on Instagram, which I mean is essentially just Fancy Alice's Instagram account. Fiona manages it for her, and you should all follow that. Give that a follow, and then demand pictures of Fancy Alice. She's got them. She's got access. She's just holding out.
I'm just holding out.
Give the people what they want.
Well, to finish off, my name's Fiona. I run the What Am I Rolling podcast, a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. Run many one-shot stuff. Jacob has been on a couple of them. You were on the very first episode, which was Honey Heist, which was super fun. You've been on Adventure Skeletons, Pugmire most recently, and of course you ran the one-shot end of year special, which was our engagement one-shot, which is super great. And I like it a lot.
It could have had a better ending. I think the answer was okay, I guess.
No, it was fine.
I think it was okay, fine.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, and we will see you next time. Bye. Gross. Why would you end a podcast like that, Jay?